Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. And also a reminder today that we're brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Right now, Three Martini Lunch listeners can post jobs on ZipRecruiter for free by going to ZipRecruiter.com/free trial. Oh, Jim, a day from now, from the time we're recording this, it'll be just about all over for the Obama administration. You and I have been doing this podcast for over 6 years, and not a day of it has occurred outside the Obama administration. I can't wait for that fact to change. And our good martini today gives us reason for hope. This is from The Hill. Donald Trump is ready to take an axe to government spending. Staffers for the Trump transition team have been meeting with career staff at the White House ahead of Friday's presidential inauguration to outline their plans for shrinking the federal bureaucracy. The changes they propose are dramatic. The Departments of Commerce and Energy would see major reductions in funding, with programs under their jurisdiction either being eliminated or transferred to other agencies. The Departments of Transportation, Justice, and State would see significant cuts and program eliminations. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting would be privatized, while the National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities would be eliminated entirely. Overall, the blueprint being used by Trump's team would reduce federal spending by $10.5 trillion over 10 years. The proposed cuts hew closely to a blueprint published last year by the Heritage Foundation. Jim, we know from being in Washington as long as we have that that's a lot easier said than done. Having 48 Democrats in the Senate means a lot of this could get gummed up. But the fact that an administration is coming in with a strong desire to do this and listening to good conservatives is very encouraging.
Greg, as author of The Wheat Agency, an extensive look at the culture and the nature of the federal bureaucracy, tighten those chin straps. This is going to be a giant, giant fight, I suspect. And what's going to happen, and we've seen this happen through most of the spending fights of recent memory, every time you try to cut something, there's going to point to the single most important thing that the agency does. And they will say, well, if you cut us, we'll have no choice but to do X. They used to call this the Washington Monument Strategy. The Department of the Interior does a lot of stuff, but one of the things they do is they run the Washington Monument, right? Part of the national parks. People would look at the Department of the Interior budget and say, we don't really need all that. Let's give them 95% of what they got last year, or 98%, or some cut that was not a draconian, down to the bone marrow level cut. And inevitably, the people at the Department of the Interior say, well, look, you could do that, but we're going to have to shut down the Washington Monument, which, by the way, is actually, I think, shut down right now because of a broken elevator. So maybe that that saber rattling isn't going to have the same effect this time around. I suspect, man, every cute and cuddly National Endowment for the Arts project that's ever been done will be cited as an example of, oh, my goodness, how could you cut this? Not nearly as much Robert Mapplethorpe, Greg. Not as much of guys doing what to each other and crucifixes and urine and stuff like that. I've always felt that because art is so arbitrary, because it is so beauty is defined by the eye of the beholder, you got to be very careful about what kind of artwork you decide. Yes, this supports taxpayer dollars. Inevitably, this will be seen as an assassination attempt on Big Bird. Greg, my little boys are kind of outgrown this, but you still have young ones around. Have you, by any chance, bought anything with Sesame Street stuff on it?
Yeah.
All right.
I think so.
You weren't paying pennies on the dollar for that thing, right?
No.
Yeah. Wasn't Tickle Me Elmo, weren't people killing them over them like it was, crack cocaine a few years ago? Call me crazy. I think the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the folks who make all those wonderful Sesame Street shows and stuff like that, they can make money. In fact, they've got one of the most valuable franchise properties out there. And the idea that somehow, without taxpayer dollars, the whole thing's going to collapse like a Jenga tower, just doesn't hold water. So, God bless the administration and their efforts in this. There's plenty of fat to be trimmed. There's plenty of federal programs that are wasteful, that are unnecessary. There are examples where the benefits of these federal programs are far too specialized and far not in the national interest. Lots of things that can be done by the private sector. Lots of things that are better done by nonprofits. But having seen history on this, Greg, I am not holding my breath for these cuts to go through. But if it does, wonderful. I'll be thrilled to see it happen. But I think, if nothing else, considering how there are a lot of times where Donald Trump did not sound like he was very serious about trying to cut the size, scope, and cost of the federal government, I am thrilled by their efforts, and we'll see what shakes out in the year to come.
Two follow-ups on what you said, Jim. First of all, I think HBO has control of Sesame Street now, so that's not even a warm, fuzzy explanation for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Secondly, if you don't remember who Robert Mapplethorpe is, for Pete's sake, do not Google him. Please, please do not Google him.
At least not in Google Images. My God, yes. This edition of the Three Martini Lunch is not safe for work.
That's right. And of course, yes, you'll get the, what will happen to art without government funding? Pretty sure
Cowboy Poetry Festival that Harry Reid loves so much.
Cowboy Poetry Festival. Pretty sure there was art and poetry before the National Endowment for the Arts, but I could be wrong. All right, on to the bad martini now. And yesterday, Jim, was big-time confirmation hearing day up on Capitol Hill. I believe 4 different Trump nominees were facing their confirmation hearings. We had Commerce, we had EPA, we had UN Ambassador, and Health and Human Services Secretary. Tom Price, of course, of Georgia, the congressman, is the nominee to be Health and Human Services Secretary. And he was questioned at one point by Bernie Sanders, who I'm sure was on the fence about whether or not he was going to vote for Tom Price's confirmation. But he went to his standard line of whether or not health care is a right. And here is I hesitate to call it an exchange because Price got about 3 words in here between Sanders and Price about health care being a right or not.
Do you believe that health care is a right of all Americans, whether they're rich or they're poor? Should people, because they are Americans, be able to go to the doctor when they need to, be able to go into a hospital because they are Americans?
Yes, we're a compassionate society.
No, we are not a compassionate society. In terms of our relationship to poor and working people, our record is worse than virtually any other country on earth. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any other major country on earth, and half of our senior older workers have nothing set aside for retirement. So I don't think compared to other countries we are particularly compassionate.
Jim, so many different ways we could go on this. Obviously, if you look at charitable contributions, Americans dwarf everyone else in the world, probably exponentially in their charitable giving, not only domestically but internationally when there's a major disaster, or even other charities that continually do good work around the world. But Sanders' basic premise here, and this is no surprise coming from him, is that if we are compassionate, quote unquote, it means the government is taking care of it and therefore the taxpayers are forced to do it, rather than actually relying on people to be charitable and compassionate. They're two very different things, and the liberals have deliberately mixed up the definitions of words here.
Yeah, you put it very well, that this is a extremely narrow definition of compassion. That unless you support larger federal programs and larger spending and more government activity, like to me, it's entirely reasonable to be to oppose these programs not out of some sort of free market ideology or any type of philosophy of government, but just simply they do a bad job, right? The sheer amount of overhead, the sheer amount of spending. If you give money to a charity, good charities have very high pass-through rates. The federal bureaucracy doesn't, and that's why people are very wary about using the government as a tool to solve problems in this country, because we've been declaring this war on poverty for more than a generation now, and it hasn't had the impact that all the people promised it was going to have. Kind of separately, though, I'm almost glad Bernie Sanders makes a comment like this. Ever since his rise in 2015, 2016, the fact that he's been the flavor of the month and kind of this. Greg, are you baffled by the fact that Bernie Sanders has this cuddly grandfatherly image in the eyes of particularly on social media, certainly his fan base, but I think even beyond his fan base, he is seen as this charming, lovable, there are times Bernie Sanders is a bitter, angry old man. And I kind of like seeing that side of him come out just because I think it is more authentic. I don't think that he is this kind-hearted, soft gentleman who just wants to help people. I think deep down he looks around in America and he's disgusted that we don't live up to his standards. And, I want to say various rude things in response to that kind of sentiment. But I think when you see Bernie Sanders dumping on America, you are seeing the real Bernie Sanders. And when you see him, him indicting the country as a whole for not meeting his standard of compassion, I don't know. I think that's, on the one hand, this is bad. You don't like seeing this from a U.S. senator. On the other hand, I think the mask is slipping, and I'm kind of glad to see this comment get some attention.
Very well stated. Yeah, absolutely right. And not surprising, because that's generally the way the socialists look at things. They want more government power and disdain for those who disagree with them, for sure. Well, we mentioned, Jim, a little while ago that the government could be smaller. We've heard other stories that thousands of people who are already civil servants just have no desire to work in a Trump administration, so they might just quit, which would make shrinking government easier, because then you just don't replace them. But others, on the other hand, whether they're at companies that have decided to grow during the Trump administration or perhaps even some government departments, are you hiring? Do you know where to post your job to find the best candidates? Because posting your job in one place is not enough to find quality candidates. You should know by now that if you want the perfect hire, you need to post your job on all of the top job sites, and now you can very easily. With ZipRecruiter.com, you can post your job to 100-plus job sites all at once, including social media networks like Facebook and Twitter, all with a single click.
Find candidates in any city or industry nationwide. Just post once and watch your qualified candidates roll into ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use interface. No more juggling emails or calls to your office. You can quickly screen candidates, rate them, and hire the right person fast. Find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by more than 1 million businesses.
And right now, 3 Martini Lunch listeners can post jobs on ZipRecruiter for free. You can do it for free by going to ZipRecruiter.com/free trial. That's ZipRecruiter.com/free trial. One more time, to try it for free, go to ZipRecruiter.com/free trial. All right, on to the crazy martini now, Jim. And over the past few years, one of our favorite Democrats, and that's not a long list, let's put it that way.
Not enormous competition for that title, yes.
is Hawaii Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, an Iraq war vet. She's been very critical of the Obama administration, specifically on its reluctance to define our enemy, whether it's ISIS or any of these other radical Islamic groups, as radical Islam. So at least on that front, she seems to be one of the more rational thinking Democrats. But she's done something here that's a little bit odd. Here's the Politico story. Representative Tulsi Gabbard's office won't say who is paying for the Hawaii Democrats' controversial trip to Syria and Lebanon this week. Gabbard spokeswoman Emily Latimer said the trip wasn't funded using taxpayer dollars and was approved by the House Ethics Committee, but wouldn't provide further information when pressed by Politico. The lawmaker is currently on the trip, though it's not clear exactly when she'll be returning. Congressional leaders were blindsided by Gabbard's trip to war-ravaged Syria, with staffers saying she didn't give the customary advanced warning to Democratic or Republican leadership offices. Latimer would not say whether Gabbard met with Syrian President Bashar Assad. Lebanese officials did not immediately respond to a request for comment on the trip. So, Jim, obviously there's a lot of speculation here other than the facts that the Congresswoman's office has laid out, assuming those are true. What we do know is that previous emissaries to the Assad regime haven't turned out all that well.
No. Ask John Kerry and Nancy Pelosi how that shook out for them. Look, as you noted, we're generally fans of Tulsi Gabbard. She's been a willing to point out when Obama administration policies aren't working. I think her take on a lot of defense issues is pretty clear-eyed, even if we don't always line up in terms of every policy detail. I don't know if this is our crazy martini or our just plain strange martini. That may, first of all, her not disclosing the details of the trip or the destination. Okay, maybe you want to do that for security reasons. Maybe you don't want the world knowing that there's going to be a U.S. senator in this place in Syria on this date on this time. Dear ISIS, please don't notice this. Maybe there's good reasons for that. The lack of detail, maybe, if she comes back and gives a full report and explains everything, including who paid for the trip, then a lot of this will go away and this seems fine. You mentioned the possibility of meeting with Assad, which certainly seems troubling. I know Gabbard looks at this fight and says, ISIS is the bigger problem. We really should be focusing on ISIS. We should not be so hostile to Assad. I see the appeal of that argument, except there's a little fact that this guy gassed people, right? I mean, this is probably one of the most brutal guys on the planet, and a regime that has been willing to throw out every law of war, rule of war, every standard in battle against using, targeting civilians and things like that. Bashir Assad is one of the world's bad guys, and that while foreign policy gives us a lot of difficult choices, you'd like to think we can avoid backing one of the worst men on the planet. If it comes out and that anybody who was funding this trip had any ties to the Assad regime or was friendly to the Assad regime, this is really going to be a black mark on an otherwise pretty good record of Gabbard. That's speculation. We'll probably find out more when she returns. But the whole thing seems kind of mysterious. And again, people I see over at Hot Air, Ed Morrissey points out, we joke about everything being a violation of the Logan Act, but if you're going to meet the Assad regime and giving them an impression they can get a better deal than they can get from the incoming or outgoing administration, well, then technically that does get a little bit closer to violating the Logan Act. Would a member of Congress ever get prosecuted? Almost certainly not, but it just seems like a weird time and place to be reaching out to the Assad regime if that's the case. So certainly we hope she comes back safe and sound. Hope everything she gets some genuine insight and maybe can help shape our policy towards one of the thorniest and most complicated problems in the world today. But as of now, it's just a very weird trip that's lacking a lot of the details you'd kind of like to have when the stakes are this high.
Well, Jim, since she's a Democrat and didn't write an open letter but actually went there, I'm sure she'll be fine.
Yes, Tom Cotton's open letter violates the Logan Act. Lock him up, throw him in jail, But here's the wasn't Jesse Jackson used to meet with foreign dictators all the time, and yes, that was not considered violating the Logan Act. And I guess here's an idea for the Trump administration. They never do this, but maybe it's time to repeal the Logan Act, or to make the Logan Act a requirement that Hugh Jackman has to make a Wolverine movie every 2-3 years, because that would be more useful. The new trailer looks awesome. But what's more is the fact that it's never enforced. It's very vague. Yes, technically, you should not be able to go to like when the U.S. has a foreign policy. The U.S. has a foreign policy that comes from the president, the Secretary of State, the State Department, various other government agencies have a hand in that. And you shouldn't be able to go, well, I don't like this deal I'm getting from the U.S. government. I'm going to go find this U.S. private citizen and kind of negotiate a separate deal with them. The country in foreign policy has to speak with one voice. Having said that, since the line between blatant, going behind our government's back and standard conversations with foreign leaders, how many foreign leaders, how many Americans are speaking to foreign leaders at the Davos conference right now? Does any of that qualify as violating the Logan Act? So, so I think it's time to do away with it, or at the very least, really clarify what you got to do to be considered something that is considered, in essence, allying with a foreign leader against your own government.
Wow. Jim, this is our last 3 Martini lunch in the Obama administration. Feels pretty good, huh?
Wow, we made it. Well, knocking on wood. You or I get hit by buses. They're like, just think it was Obama keeping him alive the whole time. No, it's interesting. I actually had written in the Morning Jolt today that, it's been bad. In some ways, it actually hasn't been as bad as I expected, just because I figured we'd have more terrorist attacks by now. So always look on the bright side of life, as Monty Python told us.
That's right. You are out tomorrow, I'm sure, trying to hit as many Trump inaugural balls as you can. So
yeah.
We'll see you Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. There will be a 3 Martini lunch tomorrow, though, so join us then for the Friday edition of the 3 Martini lunch. And don't forget to visit our friends at ZipRecruiter. As we said, 3 Martini lunch listeners can now post jobs on ZipRecruiter for free by going to ZipRecruiter.com/free trial.